Arcega-Whiteside, the Birds is back. Adam Caplan and Geoff Mosher here as we always are. Adam, we said in our last podcast that we were going to do another one by the end of the week because we suspected there would be some hard news coming. Well, hard news came, and we've got plenty to dive into. The firing of some assistant coaches, the current and future state of the coaching staff, and also some noteworthy comments by Howie Roseman and Doug Pederson at their press conferences. So let me just set the scene here. As most people know by now, a day after Doug Pederson had said that Mike Groh and Carson Walch would be back and then waffled on whether or not Jim Schwartz would be back, a day later, Groh and Walch are not back, and Schwartz for now is still with the team, for now. So go figure. Adam, you've got info, I have info. Let's just kind of get into it, and I'll start off with you.
Well, with Carson Walch, Geoff, the expectation was largely one thing. Just for the record, I don't talk about coaches getting fired for any. I just won't do it until either you or I report it. Mm-hmm. I don't speculate. It's not my job to speculate. I'm a reporter. I have to deal with coaches for a living. I mean, I have a Rolodex of about 100 of them. Mm-hmm. I will see them at the Senior Bowl, Combine. I know a lot of coaches get fired. I've had a report on coaches getting fired that I just spoken to. It's hard. I don't like doing it, but it's our job.
Right.
But I said I would talk about it at a certain point when I have enough information, and now's the time to do it. So, look, Walch was going to be fired one way or the other. There was no way that you could bring him back. The receiver core, Geoff, just regressed significantly. Alshon Jeffrey before he got hurt. I don't have a reason why. I don't know why he wasn't as good as last year or the year before when they signed him. But he just struggled. And then he got hurt, obviously, and he's not going to be back until, you would think, a minimum of mid-season with the Liz Frank injury. An injury I first learned about when Duce Staley suffered the first one that I'd ever heard of back in 2000. It's a bad injury. And now you got, Deshaun Jackson's injury. And this is not Carson Walch's fault, but Nelson Aguilar regressed. So definitely. I hate to say, Geoff, that it's an easy call for people to fire a coach, but players get themselves cut, coaches get themselves fired if they don't do well enough. There was no avoiding this one.
Right.
So that would be my thoughts on Carson Walch. As far as Mike Groh, I know there's been a lot of speculation that Eagles owner Jeffrey Lurie was involved. It's not a secret if you really dig, if you're a reporter, that the owner has been involved since, I don't know how, decades. More since Joe Banner left. Geoff, as you know, after the 12th season. Mm-hmm. He meets regularly with Doug Pederson. It's not like he decides to talk to him at the end of the season. They meet regularly, I'm told. And Jeffrey certainly has his opinions. And the fact of the matter is, with Mike Groh, they're kind of fingering him for maybe the lack of development overall of the offense. I think it's a little bit difficult to do that. I remember talking to Mike a year ago. I don't know him very well, but I did ask him kind of what his job responsibilities were, because I know there's a lot of speculation. No one seems to figure it out, but I could talk about it now. And Geoff, he explained it to me that his job is to filter information from all the coordinators and all the position coaches. Well, coordinators, he's a coordinator, from all the position coaches, quarterback, wide receiver, tight end, what kind of game plan that they want from their tape study. And that's really, Geoff, in addition to being a voice of reason for the head coach, and also give him ideas on putting together the game plan. Mm-hmm. And everyone, we used to talk about Frank Reich and Doug Pederson, their big meeting was Saturday. Yeah, same thing. It's not like they're not talking during the week. They're always talking. But a big part of his job was to communicate, because the head coach doesn't have time to communicate with all his position coaches every second of the day, or because he's got other responsibilities. So this helps. That's what the OC who doesn't call plays does.
Right.
Okay, so Doug's the head coach play caller. There's not a lot of them, but he's one of them. So Mike did a brilliant job as receivers coach. No question. That's why he got the promotion. It's just interesting how things work out. People would bring up, Frank Reich. Certainly Frank did a good job when he was here, but I always said his responsibilities were overstated. He wasn't a play caller. Doug called the plays. I think sometimes fans, just because guys leave, they just assume if it's not as good, it's those coaches. But yeah, we warn people. I would say, I'll just bring this up too, because when you and I started doing these shows in June of 19, I'm going to say something like that. May or June?
18. Well, you mean just you and I?
Yeah. Well, okay. When did we first sit down and decide we were going to do shows together? Was this actually in 18?
Yeah, August of 18.
Okay. I said when Reich and DiFilippo left, people aren't talking about it now because Eagles are a good football team, and they by the way they've still made the playoffs without those guys.
Right.
I said there's going to be a real issue in the quarterback room because they don't have DiFilippo coaches unbelievably hard, unbelievably demanding, and you don't have Frank Reich as that elder statesman, who, by the way, is a former coordinator, though he got fired by the Chargers. Frank knows the receiver position very well. He's a smart guy. Not having that quarterback brain room is going to be a problem. It may not be a problem this year, but it's going to be a problem. And Geoff, I told you that a year and a half ago. I didn't give you a date. There's no way to know, but it was going to be a problem, and it certainly is now.
Yeah, so that is where we are now, Adam. And, if most people remember, and again, some of this stuff is kind of like the last scene in Usual Suspects where you start to piece everything together, right? Doug Pederson, when he was a rookie head coach, told the media Greg Lewis was going to come back as wide receivers coach. And then a few days later, Greg Lewis was not back as wide receivers coach. So this isn't the first time where you've seen Doug say one thing, but another happens. And as you're referring to, the idea that the owner is very involved has been known. It is known. And what I can add to what you're saying is just that, and this isn't going to surprise anyone either, but as I was told, Jeffrey wasn't happy with the way things were going in December. And you can imagine why. It wasn't just the injuries and the fact that the team was kind of struggling, but as you were mentioning, players not developing at certain positions or regression, so forth, so on. And in fact, that is the same time that the Chris Mortensen report came out that said, hey, barring some kind of great run here, there's going to be changes. So yeah, the owner was not happy. And I can also add to that I've been told that he was also starting to kind of remove a little bit, spending some time in Florida, not always as present as he was. So clearly there was a distance being created that looks now very intentional, so that when it was time to make the tough decisions, they had to be made. So I guess I'll ask you, based on a column that I read in the Inquirer from Marcus Hayes that said, how many times can Doug Pederson, who has won a Super Bowl, kind of defend his guys publicly in the media, but then not get them on his coaching staff and tolerate that? So that's something I think that we kind of have to look at going into the future.
So with Doug Pederson, Geoff, I've talked to a lot of his friends in coaching. This has been ongoing for over a year that I started to get information. I do this with every building. I just try to gather information about what's going on and what you're hearing. I'm not looking for anything negative. I'm trying to understand coaches better. I don't know Doug. Really, I'm there to say hello. So the one thing I was hearing, and you mentioned Greg Lewis. Well, he didn't want to fire Greg Lewis. Okay, that's a fact.
Right.
I'm just going to tell you that as absolute certain he didn't want to fire him. So what happened was after I'm told by a source close to Lewis, he thought he was safe because Doug basically told him so, and a week later he was not safe. So I don't know. I just know this about Doug Pederson. He's unbelievably hypersensitive about coaches and having to fire people. He doesn't like it. Not that anyone, Geoff, does. You never do. I've had to do it when I was in management before I got in the media business. I don't like it. The day you like it is the day you leave. You don't want to uproot people's families, but it's a part of your job. Even if it's a 3-minute conversation, he's got to do it. Again, I know he doesn't like doing it. Talking to people very close to him, he hates it. Well, guess what? What coach ever likes it? But you got to do it. And here's another thing. And we've talked about this before, and I'm going to bring it up. You got to coach your coaches. That's your job. You got to manage them better. You got to know what their strengths are and weaknesses. You got to when you're watching the tape, if the receivers aren't running great routes, you got to get more involved. Okay, right. That's your job. And I don't know Carson Walch. I've never met him. I know nothing about the guy. But you made the decision. This is his decision, by the way, not Groh's, to promote Carson Walch. I know Groh brought Walch in from Chicago. But if you see the position struggling, figure it out why. Okay? And I know some of the reporters noted in December that Groh and Pederson were close. They were overwatching the receivers fine. But don't wait till it becomes a disaster. Okay? It had been a disaster all season, Geoff. You know that. Our listeners know that.
So you're bringing up a great point, Adam, where we can now kind of let's take the reporter cap off and put more of the analyst on, because I find a really interesting dichotomy here. On one hand, a heavy-handed owner can be a bad thing for a franchise. I think people in Philadelphia look at Jerry Jones and say, hey, he's the problem in Dallas. Or they look right here with the Phillies and say, John Middleton, too heavy-handed, doesn't let his people make decisions. On the other end of this spectrum, though, Adam, is if Doug Pederson is way too loyal to guys who probably shouldn't retain jobs, then a guy like Carson Walch or whoever it is who may not really deserve to hold on to the job still holds on to the job. So in that case, maybe the owner makes the right call, even though it's not necessarily a great thing when an owner has to trump a coach or a defensive coordinator or something like that. So you've got almost contrasting forces at odds here, and I honestly don't know which one's right or wrong.
Well, first of all, it shouldn't happen, okay? I get Jeffrey Lurie owns the team. I have a lot of respect for Jeffrey. I've gotten to know him over the years. He's one of the few owners, talking to people who work for the Eagles, that actually tries to learn football. He's not an expert. He knows that.
Right.
But, he was involved in it's not a secret. He was involved in the Carson Wentz situation. Remember, he was out west. That was a very important pick. And, he told people close to him they were going to get a franchise quarterback, and he was right. So, look, no owner. I remember Bill Polian, who I work with at ESPN, had this great point. He goes, owners own, general managers manage. That's the difference. But because you cannot tell the owner what to do. It's just Jeffrey owns a team. He could do whatever he wants. Now, there's been a lot of speculation. I don't know if you want to call it reporting or just a lot of people saying they absolutely made the call. He told Doug what to do. I don't know that, but I do know that Jeffrey's been involved. And I suspect what people are speculating on is probably true. How he did it, how it went down, I'm not privy to, but I would say this. It's not lost on coaches who they may or may not talk to around the National Football League. I've actually talked to some coaches today who called me. One that I only met a year ago and I haven't even talked to since. He asked me what I knew about the job. I said, the OC job, I was like, hey, you know what? You get to coach Carson Wentz if you get the job. So if we get the interview. So that by the way, that is the lure of the job, is the quarterback. And Doug being a pretty dynamic head coach. But Geoff, as you brought up, if the owner is indeed meddling, that's a little bit troublesome. And and by the way, other coaches around the league saw that Marcus Hayes piece today.
Yeah.
Just so you know.
I'm sure they did. And it's funny, before we move on, I'll talk about the tribalistic nature of fans. Because I'm seeing a lot of fans reacting either to us or on message boards that they think it's great that Jeffrey Lurie did this, if he did this, because these fans don't like Mike Groh and these fans don't like Carson Walch. But yet these will be the same people who criticize, say, a Jerry Jones or even John Middleton or other owners for doing similar things. It's either heavy-handed owners are good or bad. It can't be just good when you like it and bad when you don't like it. You know what I'm saying?
But here's one thing I do want to add to that, but it's really more in Pederson. If Mike Groh is really in trouble for being fired, like let's say that there was all sorts of speculation, but there was no reporting on it. It was just people saying he was in trouble. Okay? Doug Pederson never should have let it get to that point. This is why I was talking about coaching your coaches. Let these guys know, because you're evaluating them. Remember, Geoff, about a month or so ago when the Eagles were struggling? I forget who asked it. It was a great question at one of Doug's press conferences about how do you evaluate your football team and your coaches? Just like by the performance of the players. Right. Well, how are they how did Mike Groh and Carson Walch coach the players? And if you're not seeing what you want, help them. Sometimes I don't quite understand why things get to the point that they get. What are you doing to prevent it? And this is what I was saying earlier about coaching your coaches. He's struggled with this. I mean, this is a fact. I mean, I know this as a fact. Doug's got to do a better job of coaching his coaches. He's not a coordinator, okay? He's a head coach. Right. And he needs to learn the difference of it, because he ain't going to make it. He will not be here, despite being, I think he's a top 5 coach. I really do. I've grown to be I really respect the guy as a head coach. He needs to know that he's not a play caller. He's a head coach who happens to call plays. There's a difference.
Speaking of calling plays, Jim Schwartz calls plays on defense. I wonder where it stands now with him, because part of that blundering press conference was basically saying Groh and Walch are back. Well, they're not. And then that Jim, well, we don't know. He's flying back, and we're evaluating him. There was so much stuttering and bumbling there that it gave the impression that he was not going to be back. And then they had to do damage control through the media. So he went and interviewed with the Cleveland Browns. To your knowledge or your feeling, your sense, your vibe, what do you think? It feels very open-ended to me.
I do. I know that they tried to do a little bit of damage control. I mean, it certainly, first of all, the guy's interviewing on Wednesday. They're holding the press conference on Wednesday. What Doug Pederson should have done, Geoff, at the beginning, he's not new to this. Year one, I get it.
Yep.
Year one's difficult.
Yep.
You're entering year 5. I mean, come on. All you had to do is say, guys, just to start off, I'm not talking about coaching. I'm evaluating everything as I told you I would do at the end of the season. Mm-hmm. That's where it's at, so I'm not discussing coaching. Absolutely. He didn't do that. And I love Doug. I love that Doug will take every question. And it's one of the many things I respect about him. But use your head, man. Like, well, Jim Schwartz is interviewing. So he shouldn't have done that, obviously. And it happened. And I think I'm with you. I think it's open-ended. We're going to see. The Eagles, I know, have a lot of respect for Jim. Jim's a good coach. He's a top 10 coordinator. We could all debate if he's top 5 or top 10. But I will just tell you, and I mentioned this on your show that you do with Mike Gill. I mentioned many, many weeks ago, and I repeated it again this week. Player development is a big thing in the National Football League. Reporters generally don't talk about it because they're trying to they're trying to move on to the next thing. I care about this stuff. I love football. Mm-hmm. I'm telling you, player development is really big with this football team. And if it's not done well, guys are not going to keep the jobs for very long. That's just a fact. All right. Period. End of story.
Might have to do an emergency podcast in the next day or two based on.
I didn't say Jim's getting fired. I'm talking about the whole team.
That's why I said we might. We just have
right. But what I'm saying is, both sides of the football. Mm-hmm. We talked about the receiver position. There's some players that have developed on defense, some have not. If Schwartz is still here, Geoff, the next week or so, and he doesn't get the Cleveland job, he's going to have to take a bigger hold of the players on defense because this defense has to be better. I'm sick of hearing about injuries.
Now they also have to fill those 2 spots. They have to find I don't think, do I think people care about who's going to be the next wide receivers coach? Sure. But more so they care about who's going to be the next offensive coordinator. I know Tim McManus from ESPN.com reported some names he was hearing: Kevin O'Connell, Jim Caldwell. I like Jim Caldwell personally. I don't know him, but I like his resume. I think Pat Shurmur is a guy that you would just naturally connect dots to. I know Jeff McClain from the Inquirer has put out the name Marty Morningweg as just a speculatory name that would make sense. I mean, you do go to the Andy tree and you try to find some guys that make sense. Any name that you particularly think that jumps out or?
Yeah, I'm told it's Kevin O'Connell's the guy to keep an eye on. Why? He did a tremendous job. After Jay Gruden got hurt, he did a great job filling in as a first-time play caller. He first was a quarterbacks coach in Cleveland under John DeFilippo in 2015. I remember Kevin when I think he's out of San Diego State. Patriots drafted him. I think Brian Hoyer beat him out to be Tom Brady's backup in their rookie season. He's very sharp. He's very smart, very detailed, great energy. He would be a very good fit for Doug. I was told what is today? Thursday? Friday? Yeah, I was told probably within an hour after or 2 of the firings were announced. I was like, that was the guy to keep an eye on. So I agree with my good friend Tim McManus. Tim and I worked together, by the way, at ESPN for 4.5 years or 3.5 years. Tim knows what he's talking about. Receivers coach, I will talk about it because there's 3 or 4 that are really good that might be available. I know one's available because he was not retained. Sanjay Lal, who interviewed for the job that Groh got. They only interviewed 2 guys. Mm-hmm. After I reported both of them, but I don't remember if there was a third. But it was Sanjay Lal, who is one of the better coaches, Geoff. But the only problem is he's been with a lot of teams that have been fired. Right. But if you talk to guys who've worked with him, he's a great developer. I mean, you can't blame him for Amari Cooper's little meltdown in week 16 against the Eagles. Mm-hmm. He had a great year, by the way, Cooper. He was on fire anyway, but the reason why Cooper struggles is the same reasons why that he struggled in Oakland. They didn't want him. And they didn't trust him, and he's a great player, but you got to show up. Tyke Tolbert, who was with the Giants, he's still on their website. He's done it. He's a very good receivers coach. He's been around a long time. I think previously with Denver.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll see if Matt Rule retains him. But Sanjay Lal is not being retained. So, and Adam Henry with Cleveland, who coached both receivers that they have at LSU. He relates well to receivers, so keep an eye on him. So those would be the guys that come to mind. But O'Connell, I love the name of Shermer because Pat did a phenomenal job 2 years ago with the Vikings, Geoff. You know that.
Yeah.
Awesome.
He seems like one of those guys who's perfect for that role. Of course, like a Norv Turner type, a perfect coordinator, maybe not the best head coach, not the best leader of men, but a really experienced offensive mind who would come in here and be right on the same page with Doug right away. I think that would make sense. I know fans don't love him. The personality isn't there, but I think as a coordinator who's in Doug's ear, I think it makes a lot of sense.
One thing I want to add, remember, he was for a time the offensive coordinator for Chip Kelly.
Correct.
Here in Philly. He didn't call the plays. So he's done this before where he doesn't call the plays. Now, Pat must make a decision whether he's here or not.
Mm-hmm.
I know he wants to be a coordinator again, but would he be willing to not call the plays? We'll see. But I think he'd be a great fit. He knows the area. He knows he's been in this building. Would this be if they did hire him, Geoff, would this be his third time?
It would be his third time. Yeah, third time here.
Jeez, wow.
It's always
but we're not saying he's going to be the guy. I still think O'Connell's got a real good shot.
He'd become the Jordan Matthews of
yes, right. That's right. Very good. Very good.
Hey, real quick, another name, James Urban from Baltimore. He's the quarterbacks coach. He was here a long time ago with Andy, then went on to Cincinnati, but largely credited with, along with Greg Roman as far as developing Lamar Jackson. Might be another name that's got part of the Andy tree there.
He does. He's a smart guy. He was dismissed here, but he did a really good job in Cincinnati, and he's done a really good job. I've actually been following his career. That would be a smart hire. I know people ask us who should they hire. It's not, we don't get into, we're rooting for this guy, but we're evaluating what we know on information. Urban's a very talented coach, and I like that he's coached receivers and quarterbacks. That would be a good one. But they can block him, understandably, by the way. They can block him. Let's address the Duce Staley situation, okay?
Yeah, I wanted to do that. Real quick first, though, I did look into Mike Kafka because he's the quarterback coach, and yes. I've checked into that, and I've heard that there's really nothing there yet. Nobody knows anything about. There's been no connection yet from the Eagles to him.
By the way, he will be just I put this out a year ago, and people were quoting me on it. So let me just explain it with Kafka. Mm-hmm. The way the Chiefs see it is that if Eric Bieniemy ever gets an OC job, he's his replacement.
Mm-hmm.
Andy Reid said when he blocked Spags many years ago that he would never do it again.
Mm-hmm.
Remember, he was going to be. I don't. You might remember. I don't remember. Whatever team wanted him. What team was it? Do you know?
Can't remember at the time what team.
But he said it was wrong. He'll never do it again.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't imagine that Andy would. Again, I know it was a long time ago, but if Kafka got involved, I don't think he would block him. I'm going to take Andy at his word.
Mm-hmm.
And some teams sometimes go back on the word, but nevertheless, Mike is really, really smart. It's really funny. It's like you never looked at him as an OC, but apparently he's really smart.
Yeah,
really smart.
No doubt about that. So that's a good segue, right? Because if Bieniemy left, he's a running backs coach by trade. That might open up a spot for Kansas City to need a running backs coach. And why I bring Duce Staley into this is because it sure seems like Duce Staley is not in line for this offensive coordinator job. He is the assistant head coach of the Eagles. He's also the running backs coach, but he has not ever been really considered to be offensive coordinator. Or at least if he has, he's been passed up for other guys. I can only say this. My sense is that we just talked about it with Doug. There's only so many times that you're not going to get that opportunity before you start to look elsewhere for opportunities. So is he under contract? I think he is because he was just promoted last year when they did those wave of promotions, right?
Yes.
But you can be let out of your contract, and it would not surprise me at all.
Well, you can ask out.
Yeah, you can ask out. And wouldn't surprise me if Duce was looking around thinking, I need to be somewhere else to get my profile elevated.
Yeah, so people want to know, why not Duce? Okay, so checking with several sources. Duce has got unbelievable command, like incredible. The guys respond to him, the running backs. Stalin really is the run game designer. He's really the run game coordinator, to be honest with you. I've asked a couple people who would know.
Right.
You got to know the passing concepts. That's not his background. It has nothing to do. He's a smart guy. I'll be honest with you. I think he reminds me a little bit of Jim Schwartz. Schwartz is smart. He's a coordinator, but unbelievable presence. That he gets what he wants from players. He gets it out of them. Maybe Duce would be a better head coach than the coordinator. I don't know.
Well, I agree.
But,
I think the whole passing game designer thing.
Yeah.
I mean, a defensive guy can be. Mike Zimmer doesn't know anything about designing a passing game, but he's a good coach because he's a defensive
good head
mind.
coach. Right. So maybe Duce or because Andy's done this. He's trained coaches to learn other parts of the game, and maybe maybe Doug needs to do that. But I don't think it's happening here. That's just I've checked into Duce for 2 years now about this question, and this is what I've been told. So that's what I got.
Right. Well, so yeah, without anything more concrete, I would just tell our listeners to be have your eyes out for Duce Staley over the next few days, weeks, and see what happens, because you can understand if he's looking at the current situation and thinking there's just nothing more here for me. All
Geoff,
right,
one thing. Are you just real quick? Are you sensing a lot of change here? Because I just want to add, because Howie Roseman talked about how they need to get younger. It's the first time he's ever said that. Are you sensing a big culture change here? Not types of players, but coaches leaving. Need to get younger. Are we sensing that maybe they're not starting over? They're not resetting. They're not restarting. But I remember John Schneider telling me that the GM of the Seahawks, when they made a lot of coaching changes 2 years ago and they were getting younger, he just wanted to reset the whole roster, but while trying to win. Is that a fair way to look at this?
Allow me to be a little cynical with the answer to your question. And this comes with age, and you'll probably relate to my answer just because you've covered this team for a long time. Like, I'm noticing some of the younger beat reporters reacting to the last 48 hours and thinking, man, this is crazy, and look what's going on, and all this, power feud and things like that, and who's really making the call. And I just sit back, almost like Kermit with the tea, and say, you know what? We've seen this so many times with the Eagles. I'm not saying that's a good thing, but I'm also saying, everybody who's covered a team for 5-10 years, you start to see that team's warts, and that they'll always be there under the surface, even when things are good. So are we going through a culture change? Yeah, sure, could be. But you know what? We've been through, as a reporter on the team for over 15 years, you and I, we've seen culture / regime / identity changes quite often. The Eagles have been a winning organization and they won a Super Bowl, but they're still not, to me, they're not like the Pittsburgh Steelers that just are who they are every single year for the last 30 years, and I'm not saying they have to be, but I'm just saying they're not that team, and they're not that franchise. And I think they'll never be with guys like, with Jeffrey owning the team and Howie, because they're just dynamic personalities, and you see things like this happen. So.
Right, but they've got the quarterback. They've got a pretty good head coach, though. We just talked about some things he could do better at, and I don't know if he'll ever get there. By the way, okay, he needs. The way that I was describing it earlier, I don't know that he sees it the same way, but the results are what they are, and I've talked to people who work with him and know him really well.
Yeah, it's a good topic for a future pod.
Yeah, this guy, Doug is a really good head coach. He shocks me, but if you want to be great, not to just be very good, you got to realize what you're not doing well. But I just think overall, I remember I talked to the Seahawks, though it was a sad day when they fired Tom Cable, Chris Richard, and some other coaches, and they had to say goodbye to Richard Sherman, a lot of older players. They absolutely embraced the change to get younger. And by the way, they thought no one outside their building thought they could do it.
That's a great point.
Okay. Great point. So I really wonder, and Howie's not done it yet. Now I'm going to hold him responsible for those quotes he had about, okay, it was a good question. I forget who asked it. He talked about how they had a 2-year window from winning the Super Bowl, and that's it. Okay, you just said you think you're going to have 10 draft picks. What I'd said on our trade deadline show still holds true. Don't talk about having draft picks and then trading them. Keep them and get younger. That's all I have to say. But I wanted to add that because I'm going to trust him that they're going to get significantly younger. You can have a couple older players, but you can't have 10 to 12 of them.
Right. Nope, I'm with you. There is going to be – the winds of change will definitely be sweeping through the NOVACARE. There's no doubt about it. We'll get to some of the things Howie said really quickly. First, we'll pause real quick for a word from our sponsors. Hey, it's Geoff Mosher. Adam Caplan and I love using Anchor for our Inside the Birds podcast every week. It's so user-friendly, anyone can create their own podcast, and you should too. Just download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Anchor gives you everything you need to start your own podcast from your phone or computer. Its creation tools allow you to record and edit your podcast for a professional sound, and Anchor will distribute your podcast for you to Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and so many other platforms. It can be heard by everyone, just like Inside the Birds. You can also make money from your pod with no minimum listenership. What are you waiting for? Download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to create your podcast today. Hey, it's Geoff Mosher. Are you interested in money? Yep, I thought so. Well, on the Talk Money with Mesh Lakhani podcast, Mesh will follow paper trails, chat with experts, and break down complex ideas to bring clarity to the mystical financial phenomena and help listeners uncover the story behind their money. Each of these compelling stories will hit a broad range of subjects ranging from buying Bitcoin, dealing with student debt, and everything in between. So if you're interested in money, and I know you are, check out the Talk Money with Mesh Lakhani podcast on Anchor. If you're listening to this, you obviously like podcasts, and you probably like music too. On Spotify, you can listen to all of that in one place for free. That's right, you don't need a premium account. On Spotify, you can follow your favorite podcast so you never miss an episode. You can download episodes to listen to offline wherever you are. You can easily share what you're listening to with your friends via Spotify's integrations with social media platforms like Instagram. Spotify has a huge catalog of podcasts on every topic, including the one you're listening to right now. Just search for Inside the Birds on the Spotify app or browse podcasts in the Your Library tab. And follow me, Geoff Mosher, so you never miss an episode of Inside the Birds. Spotify is the world's leading music streaming service, and now it can be your go-to for podcasts too. All right, Adam, the first thing I want to talk about is, because it came up in the press conference pretty early, is J.J. Arcega-Whiteside. He obviously had a disappointing rookie year. That doesn't mean he's a bust, but it did stand out that there were a lot of receivers drafted after him who were way more successful in their rookie years than he was. I believe Jeff McClain of the Inquirer asked a question about where J-Jaw was ranked on the board compared to those guys. Howie Roseman did not divulge that information, which you wouldn't expect Howie to do. But he did bring up, Howie, just how, you have to take everything into account, medicals, character. He made an interesting point about production and that some of the guys who did better weren't as productive in college, and maybe they need to re-examine their approach to that. Some people construed that as a shot, like a veiled shot at Joe Douglas, meaning because Joe Douglas was big on productive college players, and here's Howie saying maybe that's not the key. I can assuredly tell you, and our listeners, that was not supposed to be a shot at Joe Douglas, and that those guys, did not. I think there's this perception now that they really didn't see, he's gone to the Jets and, Howie's saying this and they must have really not liked each other. No, that's not, if that's the perception that people think, that's not true.
Okay.
I'm not saying that they loved each other and had the great.
No.
That they were not adversaries.
I don't disagree with you. So on Arcega-Whiteside, so I wanted outside opinions of either coaches or executives that had grades on him. It was pretty universal. Love the kid. He's not 6'3" or 6'4", which is erroneously talked about. He's only 6'2". Mm-hmm. I kind of laugh when people are just saying he's really tall. No, he's not. He's 6'2". Yeah. But he's got decent enough length. See, here's the thing with his tape. He really attacked the ball well at Stanford. Like contested. See, with analytics, his contested ball rate was tremendous. One of the best in college football at winning. But the knock on him from people I spoke with was like you didn't see the speed, but he was so good in the red zone and fought so well. Used his hands well to get the defender off of him. And you love the kid. So I think he was going to go mid-second to early third anyway. Mm-hmm. But the thing that you don't have from him is speed. He is sort of speed deficient. That's the one knock on him. Mm-hmm. But the Eagles thought in talking to them, that his 40 time was actually pretty good. It might have been 4.49 for a guy 6'2" and whatever he weighs. Mm-hmm. But the tape showed that he wasn't quite that fast. Now, as you said, you're right. It was only year one. They need a better receivers coach, a guy that could get him in and out of his routes quicker, that understands how to coach him and understands how to relate that to Doug Pederson, the play caller and the head coach.
Mm-hmm.
If they get the right guy who could get that done, this kid has a chance to be what they thought. Year one was what it was. It was not good. I'm going to couch my words by saying it was what everyone thought. Not very good. Okay.
Left a lot to be desired. Yeah.
Yes. And for him to get to the next level of where they need him to be at least above average, they need a kick-ass receivers coach who's going to coach with discipline and is hard. And the best guy to do that is Sanjay Lal.
Mm-hmm.
I've looked into this guy. Denarius Moore, you might remember, played for the Raiders.
Mm-hmm.
2011. The Raiders raved about the way that he developed Moore. Sammy Watkins adores Sanjay Lal. Now, Sanjay Lal is not for everybody because he coaches very, very hard, and you have whoever is the head coach has to understand the way that he coaches. These guys, the players respond. He's a disciplinarian type coach, but a good guy. I've talked to guys who work with him, but you got to communicate when you interview him and you talk to him. And again, Doug's talked to him before. They've got to get Arcega-Whiteside going. Just like when Mike Groh came in, I'm told his number one priority was to get Nelson Aguilar right, and boy, did he do that.
Yeah. Just going back to that day that they picked, for a year. Hey, it was a critical year. They won a Super Bowl.
Yes, it was.
Going back though to the selection of Jay Jaw, I can say that there's more to it than people know, including myself. I've been told that basically there's things going on that a lot of people don't know about. It doesn't mean again that they don't think that Jay Jaw can be a good wide receiver or what they expected, but sometimes a pick is just a unilaterally good pick that everybody says yes. I can say that this was not the case, that there was some discussion on this and maybe some disagreement on, is this too high or is this where we should get him or is this the type of receiver that we want? So, you would love there to be harmony on every single pick every single time. That's just not realistic. It doesn't happen for any franchise, but I can say that this pick has a story to it, a backstory to it, and maybe more will come out about it, but it was not universally agreed upon by every single person. So
it doesn't surprise me. But what I would tell you is and I know people are asking us about free agency when we're not even mid-January yet, and we're going to have plenty of free agency shows. Geoff and I have so much planned. You guys are going to love the stuff we got coming up.
Definitely.
Now that the season's over. But what I would tell you is I don't see any way that they don't get two things coming out of the draft in early May. They need two speed receivers, not one. If Deshaun's here, great. And by the way, I'll answer this right now. I expect him to be on the roster. I know people have questions. Mm-hmm. They do have to make a decision on his roster, on his contract. But whether he's on the roster or not, they owe him $4.5 million with offsets, as I understand it. Mm-hmm. He'll be on the roster, barring a major surprise. But you can't. He turns 33 in December. You can't rely on him to be healthy. You got to go out and get speed. Yeah, this team is so speed deficient. Did I tell you what Greg Cosell said?
No.
Greg came on our fantasy show on Friday with myself and John Hansen, and he said the slowest team that he's seen all season is the Eagles on offense.
Wow.
And he sees all 32, Jeff.
Wow. I wonder where
the only person in the country sees. What's that?
Patriots got to be up there too.
Yeah, I'm sure. Right. That's a good point. But
no,
Eagles slower without Deshaun.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that tells you a lot. They're speed deficient. Also a cornerback, by the way. They're not. That's another position they need speed.
Yeah. Well, here's my blueprint, Adam. 10 picks in the draft. Take 3 safeties, 3 receivers, 2 corners, and 2 offensive linemen. Then you're good to go. 2 interior offensive linemen.
Geoff and I are going to do an offensive roster, defensive roster breakdown of what we think they need to do. In fact, what they need. I don't know about 3 safeties, but they got to get 2 young ones. And you'd brought it up in our last show, and you're right. I know they tried and they didn't get them, but safety it's third on my list. It's however you want to rank them. I know fans want either receiver or cornerback first. I get it. By the way, number one, as we do this, not all the underclassmen declared, and I'm going the East-West Shrine next week. That's not the Senior Bowl is more important, but I'll start gathering names for our listeners, Jeff, and I'll report back for everyone and see what I'm hearing.
You better, because that's going to be a great podcast when you do it.
Yep.
All right, before we wrap this up, let's just, I know we had a lot of Ask ITB. I think we
Oh
had
my
time for
God,
maybe one or
60
two.
of them. I stopped counting. Yeah, I thank you, everyone, by the way.
Well, first, let's just say
good.
that we're going to do soon a kind of a roundup of all the questions that were
Yes.
asked, and just an entire podcast of answering questions. So if we don't get to yours today, we soon will.
Yeah, this is a great question from our friend Drupad Patel at Drupad82. Adam mentioned that Wentz's mechanics were off in most of the game, and they were main differences between 17 and 19 for Wentz. Shouldn't we blame the quarterback coach for it? Don't they need to bring in proven senior coach and fire Press Taylor? No, I don't think here. This is again where I talked about Doug Pederson. You need to coach your coaches first. You're watching the same tape that they are. I mean, I've got people from other teams tell me the issue with Wentz is his footwork occasionally. It's not every game, but occasionally his footwork is not great and he doesn't line them up correctly or he doesn't reset them.
Mm-hmm.
That's on Doug. Well, I know the kid's coaching him. I know that Press Taylor's coaching him, but you got to help the coach out. So it's a great question.
Yeah, can I just say one thing that I find interesting?
Good.
The owner, well, we believe has had kind of a big part of the decision making, but the offensive coordinator is gone and the wide receivers coach is gone. But one thing we know about Press Taylor is that it is a very close relationship with Carson Wentz. So it almost feels like these moves suggest that Carson Wentz has more clout than Doug Pederson, because Carson Wentz's guy is, well, and by the way, anything could still happen. We're recording this on Friday, so who knows what happens, but Press Taylor is still here. That's all. That's just an interesting observation.
Yeah, well, look, right. And by the way, I not that I'm saying that there are going to be moves, but Jeff's right. Doug is not lying when he said there's still an evaluation process. Everything, and I mean everything, is being looked at, as I understand it. I can't tell you why Doug said what he said. I know people call him a liar. I just think he misspoke. I mean, take it for what it is. I think if he had to do it over again, he would have said what I said at the top here. They would have said he's not taking any coaching questions because everything is being evaluated. And it certainly is. Talked to a lot of people, and listen, Jeff. I know they were 9-7, and it was a decent achievement considering all the injuries. But this team still underachieved. People could say what they want, but they underachieved.
Cool. I can't argue with that. Let's go to one last question.
There are a lot of them, and it's funny. I'm seeing a lot that were from previous weeks, which are great. Oh man, I can't wait for this question show. There's some incredible questions. I feel sorry, people, we didn't get to them. We just can't, we try to get under a half an hour, and sometimes it's next to impossible.
Yeah, no, this was a meaty one. We knew we were going to have a lot of info for
this. Okay. Here's a great one from Dave Hibbard. In the light of the possible contract situation, should the Eagles consider trading Zach Ertz this offseason? And if so, could they get a high pick? Dave, here's the thing. The Eagles had a plan when they drafted Dallas Goedert. It wasn't to trade Zach Ertz. They saw, first of all, they went by their board, and kudos to them for not trading out when Goedert was there. Because as I noted first on our show a year ago, there was a team right behind him was going to draft him. We're a couple picks behind him. I can't remember now. I don't have the draft order. Their hope was to have, and I know people asked us this, and I'll address it again, is they wanted sort of like their version of Gronk and Hernandez. And yes, folks, I know what happened to Hernandez, but you know what I mean from a football standpoint. The league had no idea what the defenses had. Jeff, literally no idea what to do with those guys.
Right.
And we didn't see a lot of it because of Goddard's calf injury, unfortunately. But he did come on late, and they would expand this. And they absolutely do not want to trade Zach. I don't see a scenario. And I always say never. But they wanted. By the way, they want to extend his contract. This is not a secret. They've been trying.
Yes.
So let's not get ahead of ourselves. They want to see this thing out, and then obviously one day Zach will hand it off as Brent Selleck did, down the road. But for the foreseeable future, they want Zach here.
Yeah, especially while they have Goddard still under 2 years of contract at a very manageable price. Well, the one thing I'll say is this, Adam, that Doug Pederson said in the press conference, and we'll end it on this, that really it was a small thing that raised my antenna a little. Paul Domowitch asked him if he was still committed to being a 12 personnel team next year, and he said yes. But when he was asked to expand a little more on that, he did say that on third down, you still like to be a little bit more 11 personnel, 3 wide receiver. Well, third down, you could argue, is actually the most significant down in football. When you see the stat sheet at the end of the game, they don't tell you what your first down and second down and fourth down. They do fourth, but first and second efficiency, where they do third down efficiency. It's a big part of the game. And what Doug basically said is, at the most critical moments of the game, I like to be a 3-wide, 1 tight end offense. So I just thought that was a little bit interesting.
It is, and I'll be honest.
Go ahead.
No, it doesn't mean that they won't do 2 tight ends. Sure.
Yeah, it just means that one guy's probably not going to be so thrilled to be off the field on third down all the time.
But and plus he's got to take into account, he's got to listen to his new offensive coordinator, for sure, whoever that's going to be. And that guy's got to have new ideas. And the other thing I do want to add, speaking of that, if you're going to remove a veteran coach like Groh, you want someone. And by the way, they did a really good. They did a great job. Where I was a little bit critical of the first half of their work in the first half of the season. I thought they worked really well, and I got this from other teams. They really like the Eagles' play design, but that's what they need: more window dressing. People want to know what didn't work. Well, I don't have access to what Jeffrey Lurie's thinking or Howie Roseman's thinking. Whoever made this decision, I know people are saying it was Jeffrey. However it went down, what I could tell you is they need to be more innovative in terms of formation variation. As good of a job as those guys did, especially with all the guys they had to work with, they still got it. They still got to bring it to the next level.
Absolutely. No doubt about it. Look forward to doing a lot of these off-season podcasts where we really get into the meat and potatoes of the moves they're going to make to be ready for 2020. But that's going to do it for this edition of Inside the Birds, the leading podcast in Eagles intel. I want to thank our friends at 97.3 ESPN in South Jersey. Make sure you go to 973ESPN.com and download their free mobile app so you can hear me, Mike Gill, Ryan Rothstein, on from 2 to 6 every day. Shander and Mays from 12 to 2. Adam Caplan joining us every Wednesday at 3 o'clock, and that'll continue throughout the offseason. Make sure you're checking out PHLSportsNation.com for all of their coverage of the Eagles, the Phillies, the Flyers, the Sixers. Just fantastic coverage that enhances the fan experience. Make sure you go to YouTube. Check out the Inside the Birds YouTube page. Make sure you're a subscriber. Also, become a subscriber to the Sports Talk with Broads YouTube page. Our buddy and our producer here, Hunter Brody, who does an amazing job and always gives you the most passionate Philadelphia fan takes on his YouTube page. As always, we thank Todd Harrimans, former Eagles offensive lineman, for his support and his company, Body Check Wellness. And again, make sure you're checking out our YouTube page and the Inside the Birds Twitter account for any contests. We've got some giveaways coming up. So if you want to be a big winner, make sure you are following Inside the Birds on Twitter at Inside Birds. And as always, we thank you for flying with us inside the bird.